Excellent. Good morning, everyone. You are in the right place. We are in an Entrepreneurs Forever, Forever Forward. It's a program we present every month on a business building topic. I loved what Tara said, to be more businessy. Anything we can think of to make you more businessy. We try to bring you some learning and make this hour plus really valuable for you. So today we're going to be talking about understanding your business life cycle. We did our quick introductions. We're going to talk just for a moment or two about Entrepreneurs Forever, though it seems like most of the folks on here are members already. We have some people sometimes who are not. I always talk about our upcoming programs before we get into the presentation, and it's because I never remember to do it afterwards. So I do it at the beginning. We'll do our presentation, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And if there's time, we hope to actually do some breakouts so you can talk to other members. No guarantees, because I think there's a lot of content to cover today. You know me, I'm Deborah Gallant. I'm the Senior Program Manager at Entrepreneurs Forever. And with me and our presenter today is my supervisor, the VP of Programming, Katie McMahon. I don't know how to say supervisor. I'm very hard to supervise. But Katie has been with the organization for 6 years and really knows our curriculum and is an expert on this subject. And honestly, working with her to learn it, to put this presentation together, I learned a ton. So I'm sure that you will as well. We did this part. Entrepreneurs Forever's mission is to empower small business owners to grow thriving businesses, to sustain their families and support their communities. If you're not a member, and I think most folks are, we do run weekly discovery sessions to learn more about Entrepreneurs Forever. And I just wanted to let you know, as I said, about our next upcoming events. The deep dive is with Chris Pentrack from Supporting Strategies about working with your financial professionals. And Cindy Underwood, you should tell all of your clients they need to come on, because if you are using a bookkeeper, an accountant, an outsourced CFO, a payroll service, you have a banker, you need to make sure you're getting the most out of that relationship. And we're going to help you think about that. Or if you haven't used one before and you think you need one of them, but you're not sure which, great session. And then next month, the next Forever Forward will be, who is my ideal client? And as your business evolves, and we're going to talk a lot about evolution, your ideal client might too. So even if you've looked at this subject before, it's always worth revisiting. This is the important one. This presentation does not take the place of professional advice from your own paid advisors. We put these education programs together because we think there's stuff you need to know. But if it comes down to a business decision, please don't base it on this. So why is it relevant to understand where your business might be in its life cycle? Katie, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, so this tool, let me just first say, was developed by Dr. Ichak Adizes in the 1970s. And apparently it started because he wrote his dissertation on Yugoslavian democracy and the difference between Yugoslavian management styles and American management styles, and tried to sort of take the best from both and started looking at organizations with these sort of tenets in mind. And really, he discovered that, there are these patterns. If any of you took the quiz on the website, you probably noticed that it was kind of, a lot of the language is targeted to really large organizations. But it turns out that these patterns are true for small businesses, for, giant corporations, large governmental agencies. Really, the size of the organization doesn't matter so much. There is a predictable curve that most organizations follow. So one of the reasons that you want to know about this is because it can be very validating and reassuring to know that there are also normal problems at each of those phases. And so a lot of times when we start talking about this with business owners, they breathe a sigh of relief and say like, oh, you mean that thing that's happening is like normal right now? This is something that, doesn't mean that I'm failing. So there's a lot of validation in knowing kind of what to expect in each phase of the life cycle. And of course, there's also, a lot of comfort in knowing what to expect in the next phase, right? Like being able to sort of expect what's coming ahead can be very, very helpful. So those are two of the main reasons to use this. It can also be a diagnostic tool that helps you sort of discover what you need in any given phase of the life cycle. There are certain ideas about what management styles or strengths are most appropriate for each phase in the life cycle. We'll talk a little bit about that. You know, if you're in a particular phase and trying to move to that next phase, you might need to flex different muscles than you do in a different part of the life cycle. So thinking of it as both a diagnostic tool, but also sort of a way of just understanding your business better, I think, you know, are the two primary ways that we use it in the groups. And several of you said, you know, that you're interested in it because you're realizing that there is a life cycle. I think also just as a way to think about business, this is a really interesting framework. So, okay, so Ichak Adizes started teaching this method to others in the late 70s. And one of the people that he taught it to was our founder, Joe Callahan. And Joe and Dr. Adizes have actually developed a bit of a friendship and spent some time, you know, talking to one another. So this tool was introduced to our organization by our founder as one of the things that had really helped him in his own business life. And we found, again, that it was applicable to, you know, all sizes of business, and started using it in the groups. So I'm excited to talk about it here. Let me just quickly say, we're going to mostly focus on the left-hand side of the bell curve, everything from courtship up to the fall. The right-hand side of the bell curve will address very briefly, but the short, you know, sort of little thing that you need to know about that right-hand side is that you try to avoid it, right? You don't want your organization to go to that side of the bell curve. And so, Will, you mentioned that you might feel like you need to do something to avoid the fall off to the right. We'll talk a little bit about what's recommended when you hit that crest.
And I just want to point out that in that weird little interaction a moment ago when I stopped sharing screen, you should have gotten the handout, which is not much of a handout. What it does is it gives you this 10 stages of the organization life cycle chart so you can follow along, and then just a table for you to make your own notes on. So we wanted to give you something as a handout.
All right. So as I was saying, you know, the reason we think this is valuable is because change is absolutely normal and, in fact, you know, unavoidable and necessary. And problems are normal. So we'll talk a little bit about what problems are normal in each phase and then what to do if you're experiencing abnormal problems in a given phase. But part of what's valuable about this is that you should know that everything that you're experiencing is likely just part of the process. So it can be very reassuring to know that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive into the first stage, which is courtship. And you know, as you've seen from the names of these phases are named, you know, sort of life cycle names, things that you might expect in relationship and family. And just like with a courtship, the idea of this phase in the business life cycle is that you've fallen in love with an idea, right? So this is all about the founder. As it says here, it's founder oriented. The founder has had an idea, had a light bulb moment, you know, decided that it's time to pursue a certain passion. There's a lot of excitement in this phase, also a lot of ambiguity. It's not yet clear exactly what the business is going to do or what the business model will be. But there's an idea that, you know, I really want to make something of this concept. And the idea here of product orientation is that it's usually, you know, most of the courtship phase is spent thinking about what is the right product or service? How do I package this in a way that the market will support? You know, what should I do if this idea isn't gaining traction? How do I help, you know, build a business that actually will work from the idea that I've fallen in love with? And I want this to be interactive, so please at any point, you know, pop in. But let me just ask, does anybody think they are still in the courtship phase, still sort of testing an idea? Or has everybody here gotten past that phase? Past. Sounds like
I think I'm crap.
I'm sorry, go ahead. What was that?
I said, I think I'm in the trap area.
Okay. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about these traps. Deborah is on the next slide. I think we might share. Yeah. So during the courtship phase, normal problems are being overexcited. I love that it says possibly unwarranted. It's possible that you're a little too excited about your great idea. A lot of the details aren't clear. You're both excited and nervous, and there's a lot of mixed goals. Most founders, and you probably remember this, thought both that they had some sort of purpose that they wanted to fulfill. They wanted to make a change in the world. They wanted to solve a problem. They wanted to somehow make their clients' lives easier. And they wanted to make some money. They wanted to grow a business, So there's a lot of motivations that, overlap with one another and can get kind of tangled up during the courtship phase. This list of unusual problems, honestly, these are mostly going to occur in businesses that never get off the ground. So if you are in the courtship phase and not committed to your idea, you're not actually in love with it, you're probably not going to marry it, right? You're not going to actually take the risks to start the business. But some of the unusual problems that come up pretty frequently are people who really get stuck in the details and get stalled out and never really get their business off the ground because they're trying to perfect their idea before they take action. If you're not afraid, that's also an unusual problem. And if you're totally focused on making money, there's probably not enough passion there to sustain the next phase of the business. So those are the problems you can expect in courtship. And so I think Tara mentioned that there's a trap in each of these phases. There's something that you want to be especially cautious of. And in the courtship phase, it's an affair. It's falling in love with another idea, losing momentum because you run into an obstacle and then some other bright and shiny object gets your attention off in the distance. So a lot of people, and probably most of us, have had more than one business idea, got excited about them for a little bit, and then never pursued them because it wasn't the right idea. So that's what happens in the courtship if you fall out of the courtship phase and don't start climbing the bell curve. Any questions about courtship before we move on? All right. Infancy. So the infancy stage starts at the moment that the founder assumes some risk. So that might mean leaving her job, taking out a loan, borrowing against her 401k, or even just committing to your family and friends that you're going to start this business and that you're, sort of putting yourself out there. But at the moment that you really assume that risk, you're birthing a baby, right? So this is just like I was saying to Deborah that one of our facilitators had a saying about how a business in the infant stage, keeps you up all night and cries all day. There's sort of this notion that in the infant phase, the founder can think of nothing else. There's a lot of cash burned with very little income coming in, but it is an action-oriented, opportunity-driven phase. And the idea, of course, is that you have to really commit to the business and take these actions in order for it to go anywhere. And there's no roadmap yet. There's no systems and processes in place. This is a phase that requires your undivided attention in order to really get the business off the ground. And infancy can last a lot longer than people sometimes expect, I think. And one thing that I didn't say at the top that I should say now is that there is no prescription for how long these phases last. There's no, sort of timeline that you're necessarily expected to follow. But whether you're moving quickly or slowly up this bell curve, you'll move through the same phases, in the same order. So infancy can last a lot longer than a baby might be an infant, but it takes the same amount of attention.
Well, and I was very active in the early stages of the internet, and these were all infant companies. And the one thing I'll say about being an infant company, it's really fun if you thrive in that chaos and uncertainty and the idea of like I think about those old Mickey Rooney, Judy Garland. Oh, let's put on a show. I mean, you do anything and everything in infancy because you're trying to find out what works. And it can be thrilling, but it isn't really sustainable. That's the thing about stages, right? You can
Right.
only play in that space for so long and it either gets real or it doesn't get real. But it can be really fun.
Absolutely. So in infancy, normal problems, include that your product or service really isn't quite market ready yet. You're doing a lot of tweaking, you're refining the features, you're figuring out what your clients or customers actually want. You're chasing cash flow. When we talk about being opportunity driven, it's because you're looking at every opportunity you can to make some money. And the organization is profoundly reliant on the founder. And that's true whether it's a one person business or a really large business with a lot of employees. The founder is the person who really holds the vision, who knows where they want this idea to go. The founder is the one who's driving the bus at this point. So there's not any, as it says here, management depths. There's no SOPs yet. You're kind of on your own to get the business moving as the founder, even if you've got some employees in place. Unusual problems would be that you're in such a rush to get your product to the market that you can't, that you're not tweaking, you're not taking feedback and making what your clients are looking for, or you're so stuck trying to perfect it that you never get it out the door. So either of those is not the ideal. You want to have the time in infancy to try to refine your product and to start, creating those feedback loops, gathering that information from your customer about what they're looking for. Analysis paralysis is another way of, talking about that perfectionism that can really stall out some founders in this phase. Or if they're spending their money on things that really don't help to improve the product or service and that are not critical to the organization's success, that can obviously make the cash flow problems even more profound and really create an issue that you can't recover from. One of the things that I should say here is that in any of these phases, if you're looking at this and thinking, okay, I think I'm kind of in this phase and I'm having an unusual problem. I'm having a problem that feels like it might actually, lead to derailing the business. The general rule of thumb is that you need outside assistance for unusual problems. There's sort of this idea that if you're having a typical problem, a normal problem in that phase, it's resolvable. It's something that is expected for your business to go through, and you probably can tackle it and expect to move forward without necessarily enlisting a lot of outside help. But if you're having an unusual problem, that may be where you need to call in a professional. Depending on the problem, it might be that it's a coach or an attorney or an accountant. It just depends on what the problem is. But you really do likely need some outside assistance to solve an unusual problem if it's solvable. Cindy, do you have a question?
I was gonna just comment on that, Katie, because a lot of business owners are fearful to pivot because they love their baby so much, and they don't understand the team that they do need up front. And so, what we teach is a business roadmap as well. And then part of that is gathering your team so that you have the right guidance in the beginning.
Absolutely. And you're right, Cindy, that I'm not trying to say that you only need outside assistance if you have unusual problems. There are, certain professionals that we want to have in place just for the health of our business. But if you're looking at an unusual problem, it's usually something that has been created by you, that there's something that you need some assistance to get beyond if you're falling into one of those. So, and this is such a harsh term, but infant mortality can happen during this phase. And the idea here is that, if you just truly are so under-resourced that you can't keep the business afloat, or if there's a really critical mistake made in operations or management, that can derail the business. But the more likely scenario, the thing that I think I've seen more often, is that the founder just loses their momentum. It can be so exhausting to get through this phase, particularly if you're encountering any of those unusual problems, that some founders just lose steam, and they never, really get to move their business on to the next phase. If they get to the next phase, it's called go-go. I'm not totally sure why it's named go-go and not, childhood or whatever, but go-go, I always think of like a toddler who just learned to run, and they're just sort of toddling around. Your characteristics of this stage are that you've got some proof of concept, right? You've got some sales under your belt. You've got some customers that are getting excited about you. You can say that you have raving fans, you've identified your ideal client in this phase, and they're really excited about what you have to offer. And as it says here, you're flourishing, you're growing. This is a really exciting stage, but you can kind of see that success turn to arrogance if you're not careful. Things are moving really quickly, maybe too quickly. Again, there's usually not a lot of systems, processes, any sort of infrastructure in place here. So although you've made some money and you've gotten some proof of concept, you don't yet have that sort of structure to support the business in place. And usually you do at this point start to solve some cash flow issues that came up during infancy. You're starting to get enough sales that at the very least you feel like you can meet your obligations, and continue to grow the business. Normal here to be totally focused on sales, looking to make every sale that you possibly can. Also normal to feel that there's some chaos, that decisions have to be made by the founder or reviewed by the founder before anybody else can make them. Even if the business has key management in place, they're still really looking to the founder for direction because there's just not a shared sense of vision yet in an organization that's in go-go. It can feel like everything is a priority. Things can feel really scattered. That's all pretty typical. But if the founder is totally unwilling to accept help or to delegate, if there's no controls in place, that's unusual here. That's really an issue that only can be solved by the founder, usually again with some outside guidance and some help, some coaching. The poor recruiting, training, staffing, and compensation is an unusual problem here because usually in go-go, you're doing some of your hiring with the goal of growing the business, and you have enough cash flow that you feel like you can hire, ideally you feel like you can hire the right people. You're not just looking for bodies, you're looking for certain expertise. So if you're not able to put some resources towards recruiting, training, staffing, that's an issue that needs some help to be solved. And then if you've got staff that are, turning over too quickly, a lot of departures, that probably means that you hired staff that were not the right fit for this phase of the life cycle. And they're really uncomfortable with the chaos and the sort of, sense of overwhelming and sometimes competing priorities. And so if you're really facing a lot of turnover, that's another issue that may need some outside assistance. I want to pause for a second because I imagine that if some of you took the quiz or if you're just looking at these descriptions, you may feel like you're in go-go. This is one of the phases that I think is really well represented in our peer groups, and that we see a lot of businesses come to us when they're either in sort of late infancy or moving into go-go, because this period of time, I think, is one of, you're able to kind of lift up your head. Once you're past infancy, you're able to look around a little bit more than you were when that baby was totally consuming your attention. And you start to notice that maybe you need some help. Maybe this chaos is getting a little bit exhausting. So if you're feeling like you're in go-go, is there anything that you want to ask? Anything that you're experiencing as part of go-go that you have questions about?
Katie, one of the descriptions I read when I was researching this was, I think this is the phase where the founder goes away for a weekend to a conference and comes back with like a new acquisition or bought a new building or decided to open 3 new outlets or something like that. Is that a go-go thing?
It can be. So there's some, yes, that is a normal thing that happens during go-go. But there is some expectation that if you make a pivot like that during go-go, you're kind of plunging your company back to infancy. You know, that if you really, depending on the size of the pivot or the investment, you know, that the founder has made, if you're really adding a whole new line of business or location, it can make the organization feel like it's turned the corner back toward infancy and there's another climb, you know, to get out of that sort of sales driven opportunity driven and move back towards sales, you know. So yes, that can happen, but I would caution people to not do that without the own awareness that, you know, it will slow down your climb toward prime. Other questions about go-go? Does anybody feel like they're in go-go right now?
Katie, I feel that I am between infancy and go-go. Because
Mhm.
for example, I know I created a methodology that help adults to speak with confidence. Now I was doing more one-on-one and I'm moving to the group setting because I want to make sure there are results. So I'm finding, okay, where is my ideal client that I can hire as a group or can go corporation. So then I am in that spot, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, and Leonella, that's a really,
redefining.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's kind of like redefine it because I don't want to sacrifice the quality. I know that I give results, but then how do I do it with 8 people at the same time and also going to corporations or groups or industries that may need my service?
Well, and that's a really good example of, you know, you were making sales in a one-on-one, you know, setting. And then when you had this realization that you needed to open up a new business model, you know, a new line of business or try a different way of serving your clients, it does kind of point you back towards infancy for a little bit, right? Like it changes your model enough that you're having to reinvent some of what you've done before you can kind of move into this focus on faster sales.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a great example. So Tara, when you said you feel like you're in the trap, I'm not sure if this might be the trap that you were talking about, but this is the founder or family trap is really when the company is unable to free itself from a dependency on the founder. It says here also family trap because this model has been used a lot with family-owned businesses. So sometimes it's not just one founder, it's the family that, you know, really got the business off the ground. But if the founder cannot release enough control to allow the company to grow, and I want to talk a little bit about the difference with solopreneurs and people who have employees, but if the founder becomes a real bottleneck, that will potentially derail the progress of the organization, knock them off the bell curve, and can lead to the death of the business. For solopreneurs, when we talk about, you know, releasing the company becoming less dependent upon the founder, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to hire. But I think what happens here in a founder trap, even if you don't intend to have other employees on board, is that if you're unable to be flexible enough to sort of respond to the feedback you're getting from the market and to pursue sales, you know, if you get stuck in that perfectionism trap, that's another way that the business is unable to you know, become a little more independent of the founder. The founder can you know, can still sort of flame out because they're just too stuck in controlling every little factor in the business, and so that becomes a problem for the business. And the founder trap also, I think I've had a lot of members in our groups say that they feel themselves getting so exhausted and so unable to find the help that they need, that is another sort of version of the founder trap. If you get to this point, you know, and you have not built that support team, you've not brought in the professionals that you need, you don't have a peer group to go to, you know, if you just really don't have the support that you need, that can be another version of the founder trap.
Tara,
Any
did you have a
questions?
question?
I did. That's right where I'm at. But I'm arguing with myself. So it's kind of weird reading all this. Because I'm the only one here. So like
Yeah, and Tara, I think if it's helpful, even in a business where you are the only one in the business, you can sort of think of this model as including yourself in several roles, right? You are both the founder and the salesperson and the operations employee. And so, those different personas need to be balanced in each of the phases, right? So if you're sort of stuck in founder where you're really attached to a certain vision and you're really driven to make this business that matches with your original vision, that can be a trap that you fall into. So that founder persona needs to be balanced with your operations persona that's actually doing the work, getting out there and making the sales, right?
I know mom often takes over everything and then derails everything.
I actually think there's a case here for us to write a version of the Adizes life cycle for the solo entrepreneur, because it's like you're schizophrenic, right? There's all these different parts of you, but all of the blocks and things are you.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. We should I kind of picture it with like one of those thought bubbles above the founder's head that has like different voices, competing in it.
Katie, we're gonna have to have a margarita and chart this out someday.
I like it.
Let me know when you do, because that's exactly what it is. Like, I don't even know how to start breaking myself up into all these different, that's what I wrote on my paper, was I need to figure out what my roles are for each of these, and then figure out what I don't like about it. And then it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
Like, how do you do it?
Well, and Tara, as we move toward the end of the presentation, I'm also going to show you a little matrix that talks about what type of management strengths you need to have in different phases. And that will also help you to sort of think about how you as one person can activate different strengths or different parts of yourself in order to move your business along. So there's a little more to come on that. And Cindy made a really good point in the chat about having referral partners, or as she says, power partners, in the same industry, so that you've got someone to turn to who's got some understanding of what you're facing and really, can be a great support. Obviously, that's also why we believe so much in peer groups, right? We really want you to have access to other business owners who have faced similar problems. They might be a little ahead or behind you on this curve, but they have something to offer you in terms of new ideas, fresh ideas, and just support and understanding. All right, adolescence. So this is a risky time. I've seen some of the Adizes materials refer to this as like a second birth. So just like a teenager, the goal here is for the business to find some life with some distance from the founder, right? So if you think of the founder as the parent, when the business is an adolescent, the goal is for the founder to be able to release some control and to feel like the business has some independent life outside of the founder. But also, like a teenager, it's a risky time. You can't stop parenting. You can't stop leading your business. Even if you've gotten really key management roles filled, you can't just walk away. So there is this transition, ideally, to other leaders or to that management part of yourself, right? The part of you that just is able to kind of dig into day-to-day operations without necessarily having to wear your founder hat all day long. And there's a need for more structure. So even for solopreneur businesses, and we've done a presentation on SOPs recently. It's in the video library if you are interested. We still really believe that even for a one-person business, putting your procedures down on paper, especially if you're moving into the adolescent phase, is really valuable and really important. And that's partly because it allows you to stop thinking about things every single day and move into, a little bit more automatic mode where you're following your own processes and procedures because you know that they work to get things done. So you're working smarter, you're trying to, grow your profits. And when we say focusing on profitability and not just sales, this is a phase in which you're no longer chasing every single sale. You're looking really at what are the highest value transactions that my business can make. You know, how do I access my ideal client? How do I find more of them and stop taking business from clients that take up all my time, that are problem clients? You know, this is a phase where you really start to refine who you're serving, and you're able to, Cindy said no is a complete sentence, you're able to say no to the business that you no longer need, right? So this can be really helpful to keep in mind. During this period of time, leadership transition is hard. You know, moving away from that sort of founder focus is hard. It can feel a little chaotic. Low morale can be an issue if there are longtime employees and new people coming in. When I think about the solopreneur, there can also be sort of a low morale issue because you're moving out of that exciting phase, right? You're moving out of that phase where you were feeling really energized by the business. This is more about maintenance. This is more about, you know, getting the business to a place where it's performing the same functions day after day, and you've got some systems in place that you know work. So sometimes that feeling of low morale for a solopreneur can just be that you miss the excitement of the earlier phases, and you're seeing yourself as more of not a robot, but you're in an administrative role more than you are in that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. And your founder's role can be uncertain. You know, it can feel like you're not really sure that you're still that the founder persona is still needed. You know, are you still thinking about new possibilities, or can you just sort of settle into day-to-day business and not continue pivoting and refining? So those things are normal. Unusual is for the founder to completely abandon the business, you know, or to have a crisis and just step out. It's also unusual if there's too much admin or bureaucracy at this phase. So if things get, you know, too controlled, that's a problem. If you're losing key personnel, that's a problem that you may need some outside support on. And this organizational paralysis, if the energy is gone, if the organization hits a point where there are these overreaching controls, or where people are just not motivated, the morale is so low, that can obviously stall out any progress that the business could make in this phase. So adolescence is another phase that some of our businesses in the peer groups are in. The real risk here, they named divorce. So the idea, you know, is that if the founder really tries to seize too much control and, you know, steps back in with too much enthusiasm, that's usually because they're feeling unfulfilled. They are bored, you know, or they're unhappy with the fact that the excitement has simmered down. That can be a problem for the business that's ultimately fatal. Or if I love this premature aging idea, but the idea, you know, if the admin people have really taken control and the founder is totally unenthusiastic and there's really no joy left in the business for them, then they can start to just feel like this is old and tired and I'm ready to step away. Questions about adolescence before we move on? Is any of this feeling familiar to you? I think I see a few nods. All right. So the goal of this whole bell curve is really for organizations to get to prime. So prime is, and prime, Dr. Adizes says, really even more than the other phases, which are all, you know, they're all stages. They're not like a single defined point on this life cycle. But prime in particular is a long phase. So there's sort of building to prime, and then there's the stage after prime. The business is growing and aging at the same time, and seeking to find some equilibrium between control and flexibility. So making sure that the business has those organizational, you know, systems and processes in place, but there's still the flexibility to respond to market conditions to meet your customers' needs. The goals include having a shared vision with everyone who's on the team, making sure that there are functional systems that have been laid out, good morale, And here it says risk taking is encouraged again, right? So there is a sense that the business needs some energy in prime. There should be new ideas that are still fueling some change and growth in the business. And there should still be some entrepreneurial leadership that the founder is bringing in, or that someone is bringing into the business. As it says here, prime is the goal, but it's always precarious. I mean, let's be honest, running a business is never static. You never stop moving. And so this is always going to feel a little bit unstable. But you should expect in prime that you're going to feel this sort of tension between control and flex, between sort of feeling like things are aging, but also growing. That's all normal in prime.
When I've worked in an organization that I would call in its prime, it's really fun to come to work. It feels like there's systems and processes, so things aren't falling between the cracks. And if you have a new idea, people listen to it instead of telling you to go back to your cubbyhole and do exactly what they told you to do, which, happens at a big organization. So if you've been in an organization like this, you know what it feels like to be there and be part of it, whether you were the founder or just an employee. And it's great. It's not that it's problem free, right? There are some problems, but it's a fun place to work.
Yeah. And speaking of problems, it's really normal to feel like, wait a second, I'm not sure that we actually have got quite enough control in place, or that we've got quite enough management depth here. So it may be that you're facing problems that you just don't have somebody on the team that's really prepared to address them. Totally normal. There's no expectation that you've identified every resource you're going to need and gotten it on board. And there is also this risk of getting stuck in the status quo because this phase is working so well, right? The business is doing really well. As Deborah says, people enjoy coming to work. They've got enough guidelines. They've got sort of those boundaries around their work where they feel both safe and encouraged to bring in new ideas. So it can be a really fun time. But if it's a little bit too comfortable, you might get stuck in the status quo. It's unusual if you start to feel that sort of lack of, this says no sense of urgency. I also think of that as just a lack of enthusiasm. If there's really no sense that you need to move quickly on anything, that will cause the business to slowly peter out. Or if you're just too stuck on how you got to prime, the things that got you to this phase, and you're unwilling to entertain new ideas, then that also will be a problem that can lead to low morale. And for the solopreneur, if you're unwilling to let yourself have new ideas, to explore new paths, that can also be a way that you kind of stifle your own creativity. So I said we're going to focus on the left-hand side of the bell curve. And those are all of the phases that are on that side. I do want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen on the other side, but this is just a reminder that this is all a normal aging process. And as it says here, the only constant is change itself. Change will continue to occur. On that far side of the bell curve, these are the phases that can ultimately, as you can see at the bottom there, lead to death of an organization. And, I've heard many people say, for example, that if you look at large governmental agencies, they're usually sort of falling down this right side. A lot of what you see there is too much bureaucracy or administrative, sort of hurdles that people have to get over in order to interact with the business. If your customers are finding that, you've gotten to be sort of too heavy on the systems and processes, and that you're no longer client oriented, that, if you've really kind of gotten too wrapped up in your own processes, that's also obviously overly bureaucratic and will sort of point you down that right-hand side. The guidance that Dr. Adizes offers is that, and Will, I know you mentioned that your quiz results said you might be in the fall. The guidance here is that you really can decide to do something in your business that tumbles you back down the left-hand side of the curve intentionally, right? you can decide it's time to introduce a new line of business. It's time to grow to a new location. It's time to scale into a franchise model. All of those things will cause your business to go back down toward infancy, even courtship, if you're, really exploring a whole new way of doing business. But because you've grown the business to prime or past prime, you've got a sustainable business that can keep going, despite the fact that you're really introducing this whole new variable, right? So your business will continue to survive while it makes that climb again, if you bring in a new idea. And so you want to do that to avoid going down the right side of the bell curve. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And as a matter of fact, if I think if Sandy, my wife and co-owner, took this quiz, she would have I think we would be coming out much more on the left side. And I say that because a couple of years ago, Sandy and I sort of switched roles. So she really is now the day-to-day, hour-to-hour runner of the business, and I fly a little higher off the ground. So, I think we did that, and that was a very positive thing, and it still is. So I don't see it as a total negative. I see it as an opportunity to sort of say, okay,
yeah,
how do we stay over here?
Well, and the other reason that I appreciate you sharing that is because what I've seen in organizations where several different people within the organization take the quiz is that the results that they get are usually not exactly the same. Obviously, the results that this quiz is going to give you are dependent on the way that you view the business, your perspective, but also, frankly, a little bit on personality and sort of, your own feelings about the various problems that the business may be encountering. Your pessimism or optimism about those things can affect the way that you answer the questions too.
Not to mention in our business, because we're so seasonally focused in terms of the most pressure and the most amount of employees we have and the most amount of work being done and the most risk is June, July, and August. You're asking me in February,
right.
Different set of answers than in July.
Right. So, this is not a hard and fast, the results of the quiz are not always like absolutely accurate. But one of the things that I think can be helpful if you do have other people involved in your business that you want to have a conversation with about the life cycle is they either can take the quiz themselves, or you can kind of sit down and look at these normal and abnormal problem lists and use them almost like a checklist to say, which of these problems are we encountering? Because that'll probably be the most accurate way to determine what phase you're in. And for a lot of people, it's that between thing, like I'm moving from infancy into go-go. I'm moving from go-go toward adolescence. So just some ways to kind of use the curve to think about your business. And Tara, this is what I was referencing a minute ago. I want to just say very quickly here that Adizes also has a management style philosophy that I think is really useful. There is a paid quiz. I think it's something like $50 to take, but you don't have to do that to understand this model. The idea is that at different phases, the business needs different management strengths. So in the beginning, in that courtship and infancy phase, the entrepreneurial spirit is super important. And you can see on here that an entrepreneur is results driven, moves quickly, and really is looking at big picture global issues, right? They're saying, how do we keep this thing alive? How do we keep it going? And so moving up to that top right corner is the entrepreneurial management style. On the bottom left corner in the administrator management style, that philosophy, that person, that management style moves slowly, is focused on process and really implementing a lot of structure. And that becomes really important as you're moving from adolescence into prime. You need somebody who's going to put those controls in place, who's going to write out those processes and procedures. You may need to activate the part of yourself that does those things. And that's really hard for most business owners, because if you started a business, you probably have a lot of entrepreneurial energy, and turning on that administrator side of yourself can be incredibly difficult. That might be another really good time to look for some outside support, or at the very least, to find a process that works for you to document some of your own internal processes so that you get those structures in place that protect the business. Excuse me. Integrator is apparently the hardest to find. Like in hiring, finding someone who's an integrator is very difficult. But the idea with an integrator is that they're able to, maintain this sort of big picture global view. They work really creatively, and they help all these other management styles to work together to keep the business moving in the right direction. Integrators tend to be relationship oriented. They're really good at getting people around the table, bringing these ideas all into a conversation. And they tend to be, on larger management teams, they tend to be someone who the other managers really trust. They need to have enough authority, to really help the managers work together. So in big teams, an integrator is really valuable, but can be hard to find. I will say the nice thing for entrepreneurs is that you probably have a bit of the integrator in you as well, because you're interested in big picture things, but you're just going to have to force yourself to slow down a little bit and focus on structure and process in order to really activate that side of yourself.
So the integrator is like the wild card.
The integrator, yeah, I mean, wild card's one way to think of it. I think of it, the integrator, as being almost like not quite a mediator, but someone who really can take all these different perspectives and balance them against one another, can say, we're not going to get too bureaucratic and administrative here, but we're also not going to let the entrepreneur run away with the business and prevent us from documenting our processes and procedures. They're really trying to make sure that balance is there.
So when do you want a producer? Is a producer like a salesperson?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So you need a producer in infancy and moving, and through go. You need someone who's out there moving quickly, making some sales, bringing in cash.
Great. So this is the quiz, which I think if you haven't taken it, you certainly can, and it's in your handout as well. So I'm going to stop sharing now. This is sort of the wrap up. I wondered, actually, I'm going to say officially, I'm stopping the recording because I'd really like us to do some sharing and talk about sort of what we learned, if there's some takeaways here.
Thanks, Deborah.
Mm-hmm.